First, I want to say I want to thank SAQA for inviting me to do this. It's been a challenge, and every challenge teaches me something. I had a lot of fun looking deeply into your quilts. I spent hours on them. And I hope my goal for today is that we can step back from the work and really just look at the parts of it and see what the parts do, what effect they have on the design. I did ask each of you to say what your idea was behind the quilt. And we are working towards making artwork that fits our ideas. And sometimes parts of the piece that we make may not fit the idea. So that's the purpose of today, is to get at those things. I put these things up on a first slide because it's a general outline of what I'd like to talk about each of the quilts today. There are tools. There are lines, shapes, colors, values, patterns, and textures, and we use them in our work. Even if it's not intentional, they're there. And they create an effect on the viewer of the artwork. It might move your eye, it might create rhythm, it might create contrast. All of these things add up to making meaning in the quilt. And my goal is to help you and me. I think of this all the time. How can I make this work be more of what my idea was? First, I'm going to give you an example, because this is going to be the process I'm going to go through with each of the other 6 quilts. Here's a quilt I made last year. It is reassembled parts of one larger piece of fabric. And I wanted to convey the idea of just the multitude and layers and convolutions of thoughts that I might have when I'm watching a game, particularly the games we see on the world stage. It's very confusing to me, and I wanted to put that out in this quilt. The first step is, what is in the quilt? I have lots of lines. There are shapes of lines all over, all different kinds of lines: rigid lines, organic lines, vertical, thick and thin lines. Some of the lines are so wide they've become shapes, and some of the lines create patterns. So it's all parts of it. It's only got 2 colors. It's a large rectangle that seems to be almost divided into 2 squares. What effect do these things have on the viewer? Do they fit my idea of what I wanted to come forward? I do think that the division of the patterning, creating 2 halves, gives a sense of the game board. The high contrast of the values gives it a sense of drama. The red and yellow are colors that have symbolic meanings that tie in for me. My quilting lines, even all the lines in it, are discontinuous. Nothing flows along and continues the same. So that was my idea in the quilt. What is the most important element? I think the most important element is the only shape in the quilt that is different from all the others. I don't know if you can see it. It's right in the upper center. Do you see a face? That face is the idea behind the quilt. And what I don't know, net result is, I'm not sure that it's strong enough. It is definitely centered on that yellow line, which calls attention to the center of the quilt. The bright color calls attention to it. And it's partly obscured, which makes people want to look behind it. It makes people say, what is this? So net result is, I think about my work and I don't really know, did I accomplish what I wanted to accomplish? Now we get to Nicole's quilts. What are the elements that you see, Nicole, in your quilt here?
Definitely squares, uneven squares, lots of lines, parallel lines, filled in, so solid and not solid. Those would be the things I see right off the top.
I think these are the things we see right away. Do you see any things that catch your eye in the lines and shapes?
Yeah, there's right in the middle, there's 2 diagonal lines that kind of come to a point.
Yes.
And it's right in the middle. That's one that certainly catches my eye. And another is down at the bottom right, where it's uneven to the edge. That's another place. Perhaps on the top right, where there's more solid filled in areas. Those are probably the 3.
Is that by the placement over it, or is it by the background color?
It's applique on top.
Let's look at the detail. So there's more elements here. We have colors.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially bright magenta, a very dull dark blue, and
Mm-hmm.
a kind of a light, tiny light pinkish white, and a lot of stitching with
Yes.
two colors of threads. I mean, you made up your mind about, that you wanted the differences to show. I mean, I'm looking at all the things I see here, and I see that you kind of made some choices. Oh, and you also have curving quilted lines and straight lines.
In the spaces, I guess, mostly is what I was trying to do.
I wanted to read what you wrote about your intention.
Yes.
I read that you mentioned cobblestones as being inspiration, and you also mentioned that you wanted it to be about things that were missing and fractured, but that we still have beauty and hope and rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
Does that put it in a nutshell, kind of?
It does, yeah. This quilt kind of turned into that. I thought it was going to be completely covered in cobblestones, and it ended up being nicer, I thought, without being completely covered.
Why do you think that is?
Because it was obliterating the fractured parts, the lines.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, you put all the cobblestones close together, and their individuality is harder to see.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more of a focus on them individually if they're separated, if they have some space around them. What impact do you think that I find a high contrast between the very smooth cobblestone shapes and the very jagged linear work. Even though it's horizontal and vertical and somewhat of a grid, it is irregular enough to be very unstructured. And I find that to be a high contrast. Is that something you did intentionally?
Yeah, it's absolutely intentionally. It's very appealing to me to not be regular and exact. So yeah, I was definitely going for smooth applique shapes against that hand-dyed, jaggedy line, I guess. It was a line, but not a line.
If you had to pick line or shape or color or pattern or texture, which of those six would you say is the most important in this design?
In this design, probably line, I guess. I think that's what you see. Yeah, I don't know.
The lines are really strong, and they're bright colors. They contrast with the background, and they give a character.
Yeah.
A very strong character of the fracturing. But the shapes are important because they look like they're on top. They pop, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say, since this is an overall pattern, there's just a little focal point there where the two diagonal lines come together.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the shapes kind of catch our attention because of the color or because they're different from the others. But I think that, you could argue for line or shape as being the most important in this.
Okay.
The colors could have been other colors and still done the same thing, I think.
I think in person, texture plays a big part as well with the quilting. You don't see it as much, but
Yes.
I think you're right. Shape and line are definitely.
So is there anything in it that distracts you from your concept of the fracturing and the rebuilding?
No.
Is there anything?
No, I thought it was pretty successful, actually.
Well, I'm not asking successful. I'm saying, is there anything in the design that distracts from the concepts that you intended to give us?
No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about fractures. I thought about stained glass windows. I thought about cobblestones. I thought about how jagged things can still be pretty. The pieces of fabric, which still gave me joy, even though there was a lot of different shapes. They're not all the same. They're all in different places, all of that.
I'm all over what you've done. I mean, you've created a fractured structure, and then you have started rebuilding it, and your shapes and your rebuilt parts are popping out at us. We're not going to miss them when we see it. I find a few things really kind of catch my eye, and it's okay that they catch my eye, but the question is, they make me want to know why they're there.
Okay.
For example, the only one that I noticed has a little figure in it, like a bug or something.
There's some figures in there. They are New Mexico figures. So they're like, part of my history, if you will.
Okay.
The fabric that have a cocapelli, and there's, some sunshine, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not just something that you liked, it's something that has to do with your idea here.
Correct.
Good.
Correct.
Well, basically, this is, in a way, it's hard to analyze a quilt that has such an evenly overall design.
Okay.
I mean, there's that's a type of balance where there's no single real strong focal point. What I like about this, my favorite thing about it is the soft edge that you get with your hand stitching around each of these cobblestones. It not only contrasts with the other kind of lines and edges, but it also brings it forward because dimensionally, just the fact that it's appliqued on top by hand and not flat as some applique can be. And so the cobblestones, I already asked you, they are your rebuilding blocks, right?
Yes, and it's the beauty in the fractures.
This is a beautiful, dramatic quilt. And I liked reading your words about it. Your intention here, I'm going to read what I got from your application, was to put the Baha'i prayer in an art form.
Correct.
The prayer was originally, you thought you might write the whole thing in binary code. And then you decided to make it more of a composition that would draw the people who are looking at it, bring them in closer and maybe read. I think, was that right? Okay.
Yeah, code is actually in there.
Oh, I see it. I see it very clearly. I can't see it behind the black, but it's in all the blue.
It's in the blue. It's not in the black.
So let's look at the elements. What are the elements in here? What lines and shapes and so on do you see? Colors?
I see the line of the text. I see the two edges, the black against the blue. In the blue, there's lines also. It's very symmetrical in a way.
Yes.
Yeah, with the middle element, and it's symmetrical like this.
Yes. Did you see that at first when you did it?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's like two blue figures.
You can see it much more in the photo.
We have to look at our quilts and hope that this photographs do well. So colors, you have strong value contrast, black, turquoise, white. You have a very bright blue. Blue is usually a calm color. You have horizontal design. Everything pretty much, except the vertical in the middle that divides the two figures with a little bit of a black shape in there. Very horizontal, which is usually very calm also. The prayer, the words are very calm. I mean, I think those things fit the horizontal and the color. The white highlights are very strong. Are you aware of that? How strong they are? How they make vertical lines?
Now that I'm looking at it in the photo, I do, but I hadn't been aware of it. No.
Yeah, sometimes I see more of my quilt when I go to the photographer and see it on a wall and step back 20 feet.
Absolutely.
So what impact do you think this strong contrast gives the piece, the value and color contrast?
Well, I guess I'm hoping that it brings you in to look closer at the words. But mostly I just found it very attractive. I thought it was very, very interesting. And to add to it, but not overwhelm or eliminate it, I guess, was what I was going for.
Right. Well, I think you're right. In the blue area where you can't quite see what letters they are, it does bring people closer. Also, the binary code lines bring us in because they're small.
Yeah.
And they follow the rhythm and the horizontal aspect of the piece, but they make you want to look closer and see what they are.
Okay.
And their simplicity really contrasts with the complexity of the blue figure, basically. This is very strong. One of the things I like to comment is that the text that you use, the shape, the font, it's a shape that is soft and gentle and calm, which fits your theme. And they're also, the letters, instead of looking first like letters, they just kind of look, you picked a font and a size that makes them look like shapes all in a row.
Okay.
So it doesn't hit me first as a text.
That was intentional as well. I was hoping that you want to come into that piece and look at it further.
So if you had to pick one of the elements, line, shape, color, value, texture, pattern, what would you say is the one most important?
Pattern, perhaps? Shape?
Well,
How
you
am I
can
thinking
justify
about
any
that?
answer to that
Yeah.
question, by the way.
Yeah.
There's about 6 right answers to that
Yeah.
question. I think the shapes create a pattern
Okay.
would be a good answer to that question,
Okay.
because all of the letters are shapes and they create a horizontal pattern. The shape of your blue figures impact and create a horizontal pattern. The color
Yeah.
is really important, but I think the same thing could have happened to the drama of the piece with other colors. Did you pick blue on purpose as a symbolic color?
No, it was a piece of fabric that I had dyed and loved it and thought it might work for this idea. And yeah, no, it wasn't necessarily an intentional pick.
For me, it works together. I can take all the parts together and say, I see why she did this. But I do feel there's a conflict between the agitation of the blue that looks like water and the calm words, the calm layout, the calm or patterning. I feel like there is something not entirely calm about it all. That's
okay.
all. And but I did want to say that my favorite part of it is the choice of your lettering. I love the letters, and I do. You're putting the overlay of tulle, making us just see a subtle value change in the letter, instead of real, knock us out. And then you accentuated it with that blue. I think that might be the quilting line. Is it?
Yes.
Voice? Yeah, I like that. I liked your choice of the font for the words.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Good. You had a couple other questions. You asked in that submission form.
Yeah.
If you say that you work intuitively and you want to know if you should plan more.
Yeah.
I have an answer for that.
Okay.
They are not opposites. They are not opposite. You can use your intuition to guide your planning.
Okay. Yeah,
really,
that's about what
truly.
I do. Yeah.
And I like to put things together, and sometimes putting them together with less thinking works okay. But sometimes, especially if you're working in any kind of a scale, you have to be able to change your mind. Otherwise, I would leave a piece in there, or I would leave a color in there because it's too hard to take it out. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I want to have, some idea of scale and some idea of, the mood and what I want to contribute to the piece before I start choosing fabric.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was there another question? Let me see. Oh, going forward, how do I improve? I love that question, because we're all asking ourselves the same thing. I would just say make more quilts. Really, really, really make more quilts. And each quilt that you make, try to make it say what you want it to say, not the materials you're using create something happening that you didn't necessarily mean. Try to direct your designs to making them say what you want to say. And I do that all the time when I make a quilt. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to do this or that. Well, then I say, what effect would that have on the whole scheme? Would it make it help my idea, or would it get in the way?
And to figure that out, you do it by doing it, or just
sometimes I audition things on the wall. I might put it up and pin it. So my hand-dyed fabric is precious. I'm not going to cut it all out, and then I don't ever have it again. I mean, so I have to fold and pin, and sometimes I take pictures. I do a lot of auditioning, but the main thing I really want you to do is, when you're doing it, what you're doing, what you decide to do, I want you to enjoy the process of it. There's parts of quilting that we do. Sometimes we're in the mood to work really, really tiny, fine. But if you want to work really, really big this week or this month or this year, or if you want to paint instead of stitching, or you want to glue instead of piecing, use a process that you feel like doing at the time that you're doing it. Yeah. Yeah,
that probably shows in the work.
Well, no, I'm not saying it shows at all. It's my advice to everybody.
That if you're enjoying it, that shows in the work.
Yeah, that will show through. Yes, it will. Yeah. And the main thing is, you have an idea, and you are the person that has to say whether or not it became the idea.
Okay.
I mean, if a juror doesn't take in a show, that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not it fits your idea. Do you see? So that this is not what we're talking about today. Yeah.
Of course.
I think we have to move on.
Oh, thank you so very much.
You asked some good questions, and I hope I answer them as we go through looking at the elements of design in your quilt. First, you said that your intention in this piece called The Barn is to convey the summer sky late in the day. You also said you worked from someone else's photograph.
Yes.
But I'm hoping and assuming that the photograph didn't look anything like this. We work from photographs, but the point that is that when we see a photograph of something, we can't make it real. We're making it ours. So let's look at the elements. Tell me what you see, what lines you see, what shapes you see, colors, patterns, textures. Just pick them out. We're not going to say what they do yet.
I think there's a lot of texture in the whole piece. I see a lot of lines in vertical lines, and kind of the sky is not vertical or horizontal, it's diagonal.
Yes.
And then the horizontal lines in the ground, lots of colors, the greens on the bottom, the pinks in the sky, and the yellows, and the yellow is reflected in the barn. Barn roof is reflected in the sky a little bit, the coloring of it.
And you have lots of patterning everywhere. Every single line has a pattern in it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe some of the greens don't. I can't see. Let's look at the detail here. So the question is now, what do the lines do for the design? What do the lines and shapes?
I have no idea.
Well, you have shapes that have created your subject matter.
Right.
The barn is a series of rectangles and triangles. The
Right.
diagonal line of the roof of the barn separates the barn from the sky in a very dramatic and clear way. The two large shapes of, is it one barn or two? It looks like two barns to me, but they could be linked up.
I think
in
it's a
some
barn
way.
and a shed.
Anyway, you got two rectilinear structural blocks on the right. And one of your questions was that all right if I have them set off to the side instead of being in the middle, or I don't remember exactly what your question was, but I think the way you set the barns tells us what's important in this picture, and it's not the barns, it's the sky.
Mm.
Don't you think?
Yeah, when I first finished or almost finished it, the sky was one piece of hand-dyed fabric, and it was very pale, and it didn't look good to me at all. And that was when I cut up another piece of hand-dyed fabric to overlay it on top of the other one. And that made the piece for me. Is when
So there's an overlay over a colored piece of a dyed.
Yes,
fabric.
yes. Uh-huh.
Overlay of clear.
It's an overlay of those diamond shapes overlaying on top of this other piece of fabric that was just kind of nothing. It was a blah. It was all kind of pinky.
Well, in any case, your composition setting this barns off to one side effectively makes the sky the subject to me.
Yeah.
The other thing that the colors, of course, are attractive to the eye. Warm colors, the colors of the sunset. Your lines, all your horizontal lines in the ground, they go backwards and they get darker. They give us a sense of distance. The barns stand in the foreground because they're brighter color and they're big blocky contrasts. And the sky stands out most of all, even though it's behind everything, because it's a different style of patterning. It's the only one in the whole piece that has smooth blended colors and not particular fine, detailed, printed designs. So that is what makes the sky stand out too. I think your goal was to make the sky be about the sky, and you accomplished that. I think if you had to pick out what is the most important element in your design, what would you say?
Line and shape, I think.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I think like in the sky, the lines are creating shapes. They're creating all those trapezoids or whatever they are, the diagonal shapes. They are so different for a kind of a sky that they attract our attention.
Mhm.
That's why I think it's the shapes in the sky are the most important element. And I think you accomplished are getting our attention with that. You also accomplished dramatic interest in it by making it an unusual sky. The sky in your picture is not like that, right?
Hardly even see any sky in the picture.
A couple of things I want to say. You've obviously succeeded in getting our attention to the sky. You have that red roof with all the interesting texture in it and the nice curvilinear shape to the roof. That could distract us, but I don't think it does. I think the fact that it's right in the middle, it just gives a solid place for the eye to rest, and then we can see the whole composition. The other thing that is interesting to me is there's only one very dark place in the composition, and that's a window on the right, the lower right. Everything else is medium to light value. There's some greens, but those are also medium colored greens. But you got something almost black in that window. And it could be a focal point. It isn't taking me away from the sky, but what it does is it adds mystery. It makes me want to look in that window. It's one of the things I like about it. I love the sky. You're very daring sky. And I like the other elements, the way you placed them. I'm not entirely sure all of your thread work is appreciated.
When you look at the piece, you can actually see the thread work better than you can in the photograph.
I'm going to do a detail so everybody else can see it. Anyway, I think if you left out the trees and the weeds, it would still be the same meaning to the quilt. So my question is, you did that because you wanted to, had reasons for doing it. Did the work and the hours you spent on this, did it add to the concept of your idea?
Oh, maybe not. I don't know. The trees, I think, are necessary to pull your eye back down from the sky, but maybe the weeds are not. I don't know. It was something that was in the picture, only a lot more weeds were in the picture.
There's always more weeds.
Yeah. So it also, to me, the way they kind of bend over toward the left.
Yes.
The picture follows the sky so that the wind is kind of blowing. There's a breeze blowing.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah.
And so your weeds did accomplish something in the composition, right?
Right.
It added to the flow.
And the weeds at the front barn are not blowing because they're up against the wall. The others are blowing because they're further away.
And you're right, the trees do get our attention. They got me wondering what kind of trees they are, why there are only two, are they different kinds? Is it what's left of an orchard? You know, it got me questioning all of that. But in fact, you're right, it does bring the sky back down to the earth. The next quilt is Denver skyline. Well, this is not a detail, okay?
No, that's the whole piece.
That's the whole piece. And your intention here was to get across the awesome power of the sunset over the mountains. Where you live, where your family can see this for miles. And I've been there and I know and I understand. And you get to have a million different quilt designs every day of the week, a different sunset. So can you pick out some of the lines and elements in this piece?
Well, there are vertical lines, there are horizontal lines, there are curved lines, there are straight lines. The sky in particular was important to me. I did this for my oldest son, and what was important to him was he wanted the actual Denver skyline. That to me was not so important, but that's what he wanted. And of course, the mountains are not anywhere near that close to Denver proper. He sent me several photographs and I sort of combined them all together to make what was pleasing to me.
Okay, and you created a design that has everything is horizontal, even though there's a lot of verticals. The verticals are spread in a horizontal pattern.
That's true.
It's very landscape, it's very sky, it's those things that you wanted it to be. Do you see anything in the colors or values that stand out to you that might have helped your design be more of what you wanted it to be in the colors, the lines, or the shape, the values, the patterns, the textures? I'm going to just say that you did a lot of things in here besides just paint some buildings. You put all the details into the buildings to make us know they're buildings. They're not just silhouettes. They have windows, and some are bright and some are dark. And that goes with, you wanted it to be a night sky.
I have to be honest with you. That's actually fabric that looks like that. I didn't
didn't.
put all those little teeny windows.
What
in.
about the edges?
The edges? I did do.
I couldn't tell. Oh, there's just a tiny bit. I can see it must be a
Yeah.
color, kind of a gold paint or something on the edges.
Yeah.
Give it
Well,
a
it's
bright
gold.
highlight.
It's gold thread. Yeah.
This detail does show one of the other things that you did to make the mountains seem more dimensional is with your stitching lines. One thing I find distracting here in this detail is you never want to send anybody a picture of a detail with a wrinkle and threads on it. I find that vertical wrinkles happen between horizontal lines of stitching. You deal with it in one way or another. The most important thing about this?
Actually, the buildings stand out the most to me, even though I was hoping the sky would, but the darkness of the buildings is what stands out to me in that front range of the mountains.
The buildings are similar in value to the row of mountains, right? They're pretty dark, that purple row of mountains, but they're different. See, you've got a pattern on them, and they're different shapes. They're the only shapes that are rectilinear. They're not flowing. So everything else is flowing in nature, and your buildings are standing out. And I think they say, what the quilt is about. The sky attracts all our eye, and the colors are beautiful. But it does seem to me, you're right, the shape of the buildings being in the horizontal, filling the whole front of it, and having all that variety to catch our interest is what makes this be about your Denver skyline. If they had been smaller, or if they hadn't interrupted the mountains, so you have some that are taller. What I like about this quilt is you have a rhythm to the parts. The foreground greens have lights and darks that they're not realistic, but they give you the sense of the shading of a canopy of trees. There is a row of green before the dark purple mountains, and it has little bits of bright sky color in it. Any variety you see catches your eye. So the bright, dramatic sky hits us, but those other things are what the viewer sees. Did I answer the questions you had in your?
Yes, she did.
All right, let's go on. So Kathy gave us 2 quilts, and she raised the question immediately in her submission form. She said she likes these quilts, but she doesn't love them. And I'm hoping that if we look at all the elements that are in the quilts and see how they work and what they do to the composition, maybe we can figure out what makes her think that there's something awkward about them. That was in the submission form, and I think that we ought to be able to figure this out. Don't you? Liking them and loving them. I talked about my quilt at the beginning. Do I love it? Do I like it? I mean, I don't worry about that because I made it and I'm on to the next one. That's the way I work. Anyway, let's look at the elements. Kathy, can you pick out some of the 6 elements that you see that are working in this design for you? You're doing things, not whether they're working, what they're doing.
Right. Well, there's a large emphasis on circles, whether they're the tiny little dots from the French knots to the drawings, to the arcs, to all the cells I made circular. And then there's all the lines from the background pieces of lab coats. This was made from my old functional lab coats. The color, it's relatively low contrast, and that's because I used a lab protein stain called Kumasi Blue, and it stains wool. It doesn't really like to stain polyester, and these are polycotton lab coats. And I think this is a case where I really shouldn't have stuck to my goal of being authentic, of used stained lab coats with lab stain on them. So I could use, fabric that is darker, or I could have tried, I've stained some recently with indigo, and it takes a much darker stain.
Polyester does?
These lab coats seem to stain a little bit better with indigo.
Interesting. But the color blue, yes, how you achieve it is one question, but the color blue is a decision. And these were lighter than you thought, maybe, but let's get to that later. So you have colors, circles that are actually making larger circles. And you have a whole foreground of decorative elements that are circular. And on the background, you have shapes that are very rectilinear, very straight line, almost all the shapes except one. You see it right in the middle. The background It's lighter and it's got two very curved lines. It's upper center. Looks like a bird.
Well, that's the top of a sleeve.
I guess so. But see, it's
Yeah.
the only one that stands out to me because it's the only contained curved shape. And it's very large and it's very light colored. So it comes forward. And that probably was just a factor of the dyeing. But we got circles, we got lines, we've got straight lines in the background, more circular in the foreground. The wrinkled shapes, I see some 3 dimensions here. Are these lab coats cut out and then laid on top so there's a dimension between the edge and the surface you sewed it to? Are there shadows?
Sticking up from the surface are ruffles.
Okay.
And I thought, working in the lab, I always wished I had ruffles on my lab coat. They're actually drawings that were inkjet printed, and then I stitched them together to make the ruffles.
But that, so there's 2 of them, one the kind of the center right and one in the upper left.
Yes, 2
And
sets of
they
ruffles.
are ruffles that actually have a ruffle and they're 3-dimensional.
Correct.
And then there's one right in the middle. It looks like
It's a handkerchief.
okay. I thought maybe it was a wrinkled up.
It is a
Square
wrinkled up.
that-
It is a wrinkled up drawing that was printed and then stitched down, wrinkled up.
Okay. Okay. So, and the pockets are actually the pocket on the lab coat and you embroidered the edges of them.
Pockets, yes, and there's several pockets.
I see
and-
them. I see them. They stand out. You drew attention to them. Well, what I want to say about the 3-dimensional part of this is that your photography has to be special in order to let us, the viewer, see the dimension. Because if there are no shadows, we can't see them. And I looked at the detail and this is the part I could see. Can you see my cursor?
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the first time I realized that is a piece that's laid on top and there's a little shadow behind it. So if this is a ruffle,
Mhm.
if this is a actual folded edge, directional lighting, somewhat directional instead of flat on or only up from the top. If you have it up from high and directional, you might get a shadow where your viewer can appreciate the dimensions. See, I noticed in your size of the quilt, you said the depth was 1.5 inches.
Correct.
And I don't get to appreciate that from the photograph. And that is an element of your design that you did it on purpose, right?
Correct.
Anyway, I like the idea, but I can't really see it. So you have a monochromatic blue, you have repeating small scale patterns, you have a large scale straight line patterns in the background, you have white buttons, and I thought maybe they were green beads, but you said they're green French knots.
Correct.
A lot of texture, and the uneven lower edge makes it part of the design. So what do they do for us? The circles seem to be symbols. They unify the composition. The theme is presented over and over again. That's what it does to me because there's so much and so many of them. Every texture, every shape. You've got the 3-dimension, you have the background shapes that completely contrast in nature with the circular patterning on the top. You have blue and you have a tiny bit of green that is about the same value as your blue, and you have 3 reddish rust colored elements. To me, I've said, okay, why is it green in those places? And why are those 3 spots red? So that's what it does to the viewer, is it draws our attention and it makes us wonder, is this to do with what she wants to tell us? And in the sense of the green, I'm saying, well, that's where these overlap. 2 circles overlap in one way or another. And I didn't have an answer for the reason the 3 parts of it are reddish colored. 2 of them are circles, and one of them is totally unique shape. There is no other shape in the whole piece like this. So it's a different shape. It's on a pocket in the foreground. It doesn't have any other overlapping patterning on it. And it's a different color. That accomplishes something for me. What it does for me, the viewer, is telling me that's what this is about. That's how you do this, is you make something clear to the viewer by using contrast. Use contrast of color, use contrast of shape. You know, I could go on and on about this. There is a lot in it, Kathy. We should ask you what you think is the most important element in this piece.
Okay, agree that the pocket with the chromosomes, the pair of chromosomes, number 4 on the pocket,
Okay.
the center. And I added 2 more elements of that color just so it wasn't by itself. I made the circles running from the upper right down towards that pocket because it seemed like it was away from the rest of the quilt. If I had to change something immediately, I would get rid of all of those squiggly lines that I stitched in the background, because I think they really don't help. And they took a long time and they don't have to be there.
Yes, I noticed them, and I felt that you were working on the concept. It gives a sense of a cellular edge.
Well, they were supposedly filaments running throughout the cell, kind of hanging on to everything. But they really, to me, looking at it after I got your outline, to me, I would get rid of them. And the other thing I would get rid of, if you could go back to the other picture, is there's actually a border on this quilt, and they're little squares of inkjet prints of drawings that I had made. And I think I would replace that with a really darker fabric so that—
Now, are you talking lower left and upper right?
Lower left, upper right, and then in the center to the right of the hem, there's 2 more.
I see
Up at
them.
the-
I
up at
see
the
them. Yes.
Top, there's several
Yeah.
more. They don't show up and they disappear because I made the inkjet prints the same color as the quilt. There's not enough contrast, and I think they're too busy. This is a very manic quilt. There's a lot going on here.
Yes, there is. There is. Now, let's address this thing about those being a border. You're right. If you wanted them to stand out more, they need to have contrast. They contrast already in the scale of the patterning, but the value of the colors and the size, the shapes of them don't really make them different from the rest of it. What you need to attract attention is contrast. I think you've picked out something that confuses me. So what do you think is the most important? Line, shape, color, value, texture, pattern?
I think the shape, the
Shape.
circular shapes.
Circular shape. Shape is very important in this because the circles make the foreground, the shapes, the squares and rectangles make the background. So, I mean, shape is the construction, it is what's making the design. Is there anything that distracts you from the circles, if they're the most important?
Well, I think I've stitched all the background lines through them, and I think I would stop. I wouldn't stitch all those lines through the circles. I would stop when I got to the circles.
Are those X's on the lines?
Oh, we're talking about 2 different lines. Those lines, the squiggly lines, yes, those are just crosses. I have embroidered all those. It was completely unnecessary.
And you wouldn't do it.
Definitely not. What I would do differently, I think, you see on the right-hand side, the lab coat is folded and then it's heavily stitched down. And you see that dark blue line? I would make sure that those lines didn't go through the cells, the circles, and so that the circle stayed on the surface. Because by stitching the background lines through the foreground, I think I've destroyed the foreground.
Yes, I think you're right. The overlapping parts of a design need to be planned. If it's in the foreground, the thing that's going along needs to look like it's behind it. I think you're right about that. What is the red cell? You said it's DNA, but—
Which one? Go back to the, down there, that's a chromosome.
I know, but is that important to the design, to your concept, transformation? Your intention was to convey the idea of transition. And I'm going to add the words from scientist to artist. Does that chromosome popping out in the lower left corner, does that add to your intention?
I'm not certain. I think the whole process added to my intention because I had a blast making this. And so this was something that I thoroughly enjoyed doing, even though I didn't have any of the skills to do it. I just jumped in. I stitched down the lab coats and said, okay, now I'm going to draw on top of the lab coats. So, and then, okay, I stitched. Now I drew. Oh, now I think I'm going to paint, and I'm going to paint circles on top. So it does suffer from a lack of planning, but it certainly doesn't suffer from a lack of heart and feeling and
well, see, you put yourself in it.
Together.
That's the whole point.
Yes.
And I think what I'm asking you is that little patch in the lower left corner, it looks like it was put on later, and it looks to me like this may be a transition, but you don't transition from one thing entirely to another. You still are you. And your interest in these things will always be there in one way or another, whether it comes out in an artistic form or you express it in a scientific way. So what I'm looking at that and saying it really stands out, but she wanted it there because for a reason.
I like it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You like it. It gets to be there. Lower edge. I love the fact that that helps us know that this is close. It's just a little hint, a little clue. The buttons also help, I guess. I didn't see them right away. You wanted to know, what was the word you used? Awkward. Do you have any, you decided it's those lines, those wiggly lines that you would have left out. Is that right?
I would leave out the wiggly lines. I would not make all those linear lines go through the cells. I would leave the cells on the surface, and I would darken the border.
Well, I like the fact that you're calling them a border, even though it does, even if it doesn't actually fill up all the edges like some traditional borders do. Let's go to the next one, Kathy. I'm going to read your intent first. Kathy said that she wanted this to be a tribute, homage to a pioneering scientist in cell mitosis. You know, I can even remember back to high school biology. I can remember that word. And I get what you're trying to do here. And the fact that the next thing you said in your application was that you liked an earlier version that you did of this that was all black and white. And I think that's really a key kind of a statement, because the fact that this is a woodcut, I mean, your woodcut and the black and white illustration, that harks back to the old days before they had color illustrations and videos of all this cellular division and so on. And so I don't know if you've done a lot of wood cutting, but it's very clearly shows, the black shows that textural quality that woodcuts have, and that fits with the homage idea and to scientists in the past. However, there's a lot of parts to this besides the woodcut. And I'm just thinking, just keep in mind that you said you like the black, all black one better. Okay, what are the elements that you see here?
Well, again, I'm possessed with circles, but it also has two bold linear stripes down the side. And this quilt is also cut down. This woodcut was 5.5 feet. The print was 5.5 feet long by 30 some. And this is a 30 by 40 print. So I think that part of the issue is something that you said earlier that really resonated with me, is that the original quilt had a solid concept of paying homage to the early pen and ink drawers with a black and white woodcut. And it was a successful quilt. It was a little bit bigger and it won an award. This suffers from the fact that it wasn't the original concept, but instead I was trying to use the materials that I had at hand and was thinking, well, I ought to be able to make, I have another print. I ought to be able to make something else. But I think what I've made by not having a concept is I've made a tablecloth.
Cut off part of this. Okay,
Yes.
I have one comment to say about this. We can only comment about what this looks like.
Yes.
You cut off part of the story probably because it's cellular and they're grading and they're moving and they're changing shape. This is what we have to look at as a composition. But what I want to say is all that woodcut work, all that work, and you cut it down to fit in an exhibit. I can only think of one really good reason to cut a design and make it smaller or different shape is because changing the shape of it sticks with your idea, your initial idea. You know that.
I mean, I made this in 2018. I don't think I would do it now, but I certainly didn't know any better then.
Well, you had a reason to do it, but I'm just saying there are better reasons to cut something and change the shape. And that has to be, oh, I want this part of it to be in the middle. Or,
Correct.
you know, those kinds of design decisions can change the shapes of things. I mean, a lot of painters that would glue on more paper to the edge of it to make it bigger. You know, we can do that, but we have to have a design reason for doing it. So you've got interlocking circles, you've got spaces filled with dots, you have high value contrast. I would say the black and white is very, very strong. And then the rest of all the other colors are in the range of medium to light. So within the colored parts, the blues and the yellows and the oranges, they're all pretty much similar value. They're mostly cool colors too. I mean, even your violet is slightly cool. I was wondering if the blocks that you used to color them, if they leaned toward that direction or if that was a decision.
These were Inktense blocks, and I had a choice of many colors. And so it would have to be naive intention.
Do you feel like you decided what color you wanted to put there and that's what color you got? Or did the colors come out partly because of the way they work?
No, the colors came out. I actually tested, I had a foot of fabric that I'd cut off. And so I could test what colors I was getting. And so I actually made these decisions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can't
Well,
hide.
does it give you a choice of having dark values when you use these blocks?
Sure.
You can get a very dark
Mhm.
if you want it. Okay. The circles are telling a story, and I see the story because you have caught my attention with the overlapping circles. However, the first thing I saw were the three in the lower front. They're larger, they're different from each other a little bit, and they're different from all the other ones up above. So to me, the way you're telling a story here is with the circles creating a shape and flowing from the top down closer to the viewer. And then the three in the front, I don't know what they are. But in any case, you have so much pattern and color behind those things that they aren't as maybe they're not doing the work of the design that you want. I'm not sure.
I think the back competes terribly with the foreground.
Yes.
And
what color is it that's really doing the competing?
The yellow.
Yes. Yeah, light, warm colors generally come forward in a composition. Now you can make it work differently because you can change the size or the shape of it or the placement of it. But what you have is all these yellow cells surrounding these other cells and their background. And I know their background because you put them behind. They are behind. So the placement helps me know their background. But visually, the impact of them is they come forward and I think they do a little more than compete with your overlapping, interlocking circles. You see, because you have this nice flowing design coming down. And also, what else competes? Can you see what else competes with your mitosis?
Color or shape?
The edge, the black and white edge.
Yes, that's true.
It's so dramatic that I'm looking at it more than I'm looking at the middle for more than one reason. It has an interesting curve to it. It is not symmetrical on the top or the bottom or either side. It's not on the top or the bottom, but the top of the left side is different than the top of the right side. So I'm looking at that and saying, I wonder what's going on outside. And I wonder also is this a blood vessel or is it a part of something or is it just this design? The curvy linear shape to the right side of it.
If you could see this in black and white, the things that look like alien yellow eggs in the background actually are just a reverse image of what's on the outside, and it flows to the outside. So the inside would be black and white with a prominent white, and then the outside is white and black.
Yes, and that could be key to why you like the black and white one better. I don't know. Could that be the little awkwardness that you wish you'd change?
Well, the awkwardness now too, it looks a little bit like a zebra in the background with all the spots.
I think that it takes over a lot. No, it doesn't take over the whole thing because it's very dramatic. And we're not here to solve that, but we are here to look at what the things do to our eyes. And my favorite part of this is where you have the white interlocking circles.
Yes.
Of the cells, because I know there's something going on there and I can see it kind of changing gradually as it flows down, makes a progression. And you had some of that in the other quilt, which was also attractive, the overlapping circles. What do you think is the most important element in this?
I think the top 3/5 are the better part of the quilt, and I should have cut the bottom off and left the top on because there's more circles up above, and you would get
Ah.
rid of the
Oh, that we don't see.
correct. And then the stripes on the side are a little bit more aligned.
Okay, all right. Well, I think the thing that knocks me over as one of the elements is color. Black and white is so dominant. And then the other colors filling in, I mean, they may not be the most important thing, but this is what hits me, the viewer, the most, is the drama of the black outlines. And when I look at the detail, by the way, I love seeing the textural marks within, you know, the woodcut, the character of the woodcut in the purple, particularly in the blue there. There's such a quality to a woodcut prints are kind of covered up here. And that's not the point of the quilt. The point is the homage to the scientists in the past. I think the woodcut is part of that, isn't it?
True.
Okay, I'm going to read the questions that Kathy asked. She asked about the cropping, and I already talked about that. Oh, she said it looks like a coloring book. I thought that was really funny. And I didn't get quite why you said that until I read that you had done the black and white woodblock print. And then you use these colored ink blocks to put the colors in. Of course, it felt like a coloring book because you spent days doing that, I bet. I think the colors, not the colors themselves, but somehow the process that you need to use with that particular media, it has a little bit of a commercial look to it. You know, this handmade woodblock carved element, and it's just something commercial that hits me. Maybe it's because it's so easy to blend the colors, to shade them. I'm not sure, but
I think I was also responding to, I did get some criticism of the black and white quilt because it was black and white numerous times. And so I thought, well, maybe, and I liked it, and that's fine. That particular piece I'm fine with. But so I thought, well, maybe I can elevate it by adding color because people wanted me to add color. And I thought, well, I want to add color too. That would be fun to do.
well, and it's
I don't
true.
like it.
You've
Yeah.
done the black and white one. Why not try something else? I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying, I think it's a good idea. You know what? It's a good idea to do the same design 4 times. You learn something every time.
Mhm.
And I have done that. And I learn and I learn and I learn. And part of it is if it's a design, what media are you using? Because the media, the technique, you asked about that. Does the technique matter? And in this case, it matters a lot because the wood block is giving it the character it has. And these other coloring blocks that you used, they are giving it a character. If you used a different media, you know, you could take this wood block and print it out and do 5 of them and find out what happens. That's a good idea. The main thing is, I think you need to like the process. And if it feels like you're doing coloring in a coloring book, it doesn't sound like you liked it very much. I don't know. The process. I'm talking about the actual.
I enjoyed trying it. No, I enjoyed trying it.
Good.
I didn't necessarily enjoy I mean, I liked it overall. I just didn't love it. I mean, because it's new.
Did you feel you got a power over the coloring blocks? Did you feel that you could control them and do what you wanted to do with them? Or do you need more practice or testing?
Oh, of course I would need more practice. Definitely I would need more practice. But I just try things. And
good. That's the idea.
I guess I'm too proud of being ignorant.
Well, I get that too. Classes in color theory, painting, or general art foundations. Well, I never would say don't take a class unless it fills up your whole life and stops you from making a quilt. You see, sometimes that happens. It doesn't hurt. I would say if you were going to take a color class, for example, I would recommend you use the media, or maybe pick 1 or 2 media that you want to learn and mix the colors with that particular media, because these ink blocks mix colors differently than watercolor paint and then acrylic paint and the dye colors. And some people are they're using colors of fabric and making a palette with mixing pieces of fabric. I mean, whatever your color theory work is, I think, learning to actually make the colors you observe and want. You can see it out there and make it, or you can imagine in your mind and you can make that color if you get control over the media. But see, they're also different. They mix differently. And I think that is a good thing, a good goal.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you guys all for being here. I learned so much every time we have one of these critiques, and I hope that you guys all got a lot out of this as well.
I learned a lot.
Dive into the work is so beneficial.
Yeah.
You know, when we go to a show, there's so much work that we can only give, 15 seconds to a minute to any one particular work. And even though this is online and it's not as good, of course, as being in person and seeing the work, just taking that minute to deep dive and have each, little things pointed out to the viewer is really, really helpful. So
Yes.
thank you
Yes.
guys all for participating.